Good morning and welcome to Rising. Just an absolutely incredible show today. Robby, besides Joe Rogan, what else do we have today?
Some COVID news and some other things. Michael Starr Hopkins and Libby Emmons with us to discuss the news of Whoopi Goldberg's 2-week suspension from The View. Which is crazy after her comments on the Holocaust.
Which were also crazy.
Also crazy. Pennsylvania Senate candidate John Fetterman will join us to talk about his campaign and support for a ban on stock trading by members of Congress, which is exciting. Plus, radio host and commentator Darvio Moro will respond to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki's public shrug to rising crime numbers.
But before we dive into that, we want to take a look at a new study from Johns Hopkins University that finds lockdowns had little to no effect on COVID mortality rates and led to a bold conclusion. Lockdowns should be rejected out of hand as a pandemic policy instrument. Reduced economic activity, unemployment, reducing schooling, political unrest, and a rise in domestic violence were just some of the more devastating effects lockdowns had on society.
And when compared to the benefits of lockdowns, the analysis from Johns Hopkins shows that lockdowns early on in the pandemic reduced COVID mortality by about only 0.2%. However, the study found that a closure of non-essential businesses saw a more significant benefit and reduced the mortality rate by 10.6%, which is likely related to the closure of bars, they said. So the reason, and I know people will go, how is that possible? Of course, maybe there's negative effects, but not having people out in public certainly reduces the spread of the disease. But the thing is, that doesn't mean the government forcing people to stay home and forcibly shutting things down necessarily works, because if you remember, so people were adapting to the conditions of the pandemic. So a lot of people would have, even if you were allowed to go out, even if you were allowed to do things, even if you were allowed to whatever, be it business or go places, a lot of people would have chosen and were choosing in places where that wasn't required. We're choosing not to participate in these things. So we're not saying that social distancing doesn't work at all or anything.
It's more policy.
Right. It's just, does the government have to order businesses to shutter, order people to stay in their homes, order them to do X, Y, and Z? No, because people, when they can see the cases, especially before vaccination, when they see the cases skyrocketing, they know what that means, that whatever couple percentage points of the people who contracted, who are in an elderly category, are going to die. Yeah, that changed their behavior, and that was enough on its own. The difference between what people would have done naturally and what the government was ordering people to do, that's that 0.2%, which is worthless.
Which makes sense, because you think, well, obviously you're more likely to get COVID if you go to an indoor place with a bunch of people who have COVID. We don't need an epidemiologist to tell us that. But yes, you're making a good point. The reason you didn't go to that place is only 0.02% because the government told you not to go.
Right.
A lot of people, they look around and they see, we ought not to go out and get COVID.
Everybody adapted to masks. Everybody started wearing masks on their own without being told to. Well before the government.
They don't want to die.
At that time, the guidance from the government was, you don't really need this. So aside from the lockdown's marginal effects on death rates, the conclusions found that shelter-in-place orders were more effective than lockdowns, but still only reduced COVID mortality by 2.9%. Unintended consequences may have played a larger role than recognized. Lockdowns limited people's access to safe outdoor places such as beaches, parks, and zoos, or included mask mandates pushing some people to meet indoors. Quote, indeed, we do find some evidence that limiting gatherings was counterproductive and increased COVID mortality. Especially those, now we know to be utterly ridiculous requirements that, don't go to the beach, don't go to the park, that then people were going to congregate, were going to socialize indoors in private where no one could see them, where they couldn't be policed, and that's the unsafe.
And deeper than that, beyond the parks are a good metaphor for it, but it extends into the entire community. They talk about how people were discouraged, legally discouraged, from congregating together outdoors. And so in some neighborhoods, in rural neighborhoods, which fared a lot better for obvious reasons, you could meet in somebody's backyard. Nobody's going to really be spying on you. In urban and suburban neighborhoods, if you're meeting out in front of your stoop or you're meeting in your backyard or your deck, people can see you and people are going to yell at you and shame you, or the cops will come by and hustle you inside.
Karen will come by.
Karen's got her phone. and so,
excuse me, manager.
Right. So what these researchers hypothesized is that knowing this, people instead congregated indoors. And you have to calibrate your policy to human nature. So, in other words, if you tell people that they can't do reasonable things, they're going to do unreasonable things to get around it. So instead, if they would have said, and for our next pandemic, and maybe they're cooking one up in a lab right now, we could say, look.
What's Dr. Fauci funding today?
And so if you would have allowed people, they're saying, to gather outdoors and said, look, hey, go to the park, take walks, hang out in the stoop, hang out back, like and then you channel the socialization into those safer situations, then you get fewer of the unsafe situations. Because even under any strict lockdown policy, you're still going to have people congregating indoors at restaurants where they're making the food to deliver to the people who are locked down, at the grocery stores, at hospitals, other essential businesses. So the virus is still going to have a place to spread. So what you're doing is reducing and mitigating. You can never completely lock down.
Yeah, maybe next time that Grim Reaper guy wandering the beach can just stay home.
He basically sent everyone back into their homes.
To die.
Yeah.
Which is what the Grim Reaper does,
That's what the Grim Reaper does.
It was the actual Grim Reaper. It's not a person in disguise.
You 10 people out on the beach, get off the beach and go inside. It's like, no, that is actually the opposite of what you should be doing. But there's actually in drug policy literature, there's a parallel here where once a drug gets completely out of control and gets to kind of an epidemic quality, fentanyl kind of disrupted this. So set the fentanyl on top of heroin, on top of pills trends aside. But previous to this, there's basically like a 7-year pattern where it's to take crack cocaine, for instance. Like crack cocaine comes in, everybody loves it, everybody's enjoying it, passing it around, it surges in popularity, and then the community starts to see what the effects of it are on people, and it starts to become stigmatized. Crackhead, the word crackhead comes around, not just as a racist connotation, but as something like you don't want to be addicted to this drug because it is damaging to you. And you see that with every drug throughout the last 150 years, that when it gets out of control, the community then stigmatizes it, and people see other people suffering from it, and they voluntarily are like, whoa, I don't want to go in. It's not that they've been propagandized, it's that they've actually seen the negative consequences of it, and then you start to see the decline. The decline in crack use, kind of predated the war on it. That the kind of racist war on drugs was used as an instrument to for all the reasons that we've talked about here in the past, but it actually didn't have anything to do with reducing use. The communities reduced use on their own because they saw that it was a bad idea, and that's the same thing I think you're talking about with masks and with people choosing to lock down, choosing to take precautions. And what public health people ought to do, public health officials, give people the best information so that then they can make decisions to do the thing that they already want to do, which is keep themselves safe.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Anyway, diabetes also saw a sharp increase in death rates during the pandemic, surpassing 100,000 deaths in each of the last 2 years. According to the CDC, diabetes-related deaths surged 17% in 2020 and 15% in 2021 compared to pre-pandemic levels. New hurdles to access care because of COVID, high drug prices, and unemployment, and lockdowns may have all contributed to the deadly spike. The disease has long been a point of concern in Black and Brown communities who report higher rates of diabetes than whites. Children also saw an increase in the onset of type 1 diabetes that increased a whopping 57% among San Diego children in the first year of the pandemic. And this is one of the consequences of becoming sicker as a result of the society becoming sicker.
And of course, people who suffer from diabetes, many are overweight, are more vulnerable to COVID as well. So these are, it's not just like, well, we have to fight COVID, so everything else doesn't matter what we have to do, because COVID is the enemy. So if people are more inside and not getting enough exercise and sunshine and they're drinking too much, because we just got to get COVID. No, that's not true. People suffer from these other things. I mean, that also makes them more vulnerable to COVID, but and alcohol abuse is like out of control right now. Obviously the fentanyl issue, the
despair going crazy.
people suffering negative economic consequences because losing jobs, businesses getting shuttered because of the pandemic, out of work. That leads to all sorts of unhealthy consequences. Losing your job and wondering how you're going to feed your family is a really, really negative health consequence.
Yeah.
So it's just it's not all COVID and nothing else matters. That never made any sense.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we want to pivot to a quick update on the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Apparently, Maxwell's legal team is claiming the juror central to their retrial request, saying the juror violated Maxwell's right to a fair trial with their questionnaire responses. Well, that juror had experienced sexual abuse in the past, which we've discussed on this show previously. So they're going to claim that this juror
didn't disclose
that they had suffered sexual abuse. And I believe on Twitter now, on social media, there was more information on this. You can actually find the name of the juror. But this person has confirmed that they really talked a lot about their sexual trauma in the juror deliberations, and that was very influential, and that was a huge basis for what went on. Mm-hmm. So if it turns out that it was not properly disclosed ahead of time, yes, this is going to. Sorry, it's like
kind of open and shut.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty open and shut. So
get another trial.
But that way, that would not be good. They want a second trial is very good for the defense in general because they see everything the prosecution gets to lay at them. They have a much right. They
got a whole mock trial.
Right.
It's not really the prosecution's fault if the juror didn't check that box. It's not as if you can do a thorough or should even do a thorough background check on every single juror. But the questionnaire was there, and if the juror checked it, Maxwell's screwed. If the juror didn't check it,
generally it's very bad for people to. It's generally not a wise strategic decision to roll the dice on a trial because you're likely to get convicted. But rolling the dice is rolling the dice, and every now and then you double sixes, baby.
That's why they call it a roll of dice. That's right.
It's nuts.
All right, well, we'll tell you what's on our radars up next.